Hello, and a warm welcome to Reddit Echo.
When you're 17, the world is a simple place. Summer jobs are about making a little cash, maybe learning a trade, and mostly just staying out of trouble. For me, that job was painting houses with my uncle. He ran a legitimate business, a truck, with his name on the side, all the proper equipment, a reputation for good work. He was a hard worker, a man who built his life with his own two hands, and when he needed an extra pair of them, he'd call me. It was honest work, repetitive, sometimes tedious, but satisfying. You'd see the transformation, a faded, weathered house brought back to life with a fresh coat of paint. I learned about preparation, about the right brush for the right trim, about how weather dictates your entire schedule. One particular fall, the weather was our enemy. It felt like it rained every other day, a constant damp delay that pushed jobs back and created a backlog of half-finished houses. My uncle, juggling multiple clients, was stressed, but he was a man of his word. He was determined to finish every job he started. The music becomes subtly more ominous, introducing a low, cello-driven melody. The sound of light rain begins. Part 2. The Victorian House. Among the backlog was one house in particular, an old Victorian home in a quiet, established part of town. It was the kind of house with character gingerbread trim, a wraparound porch, and a small oval attic window that gave it a watchful, almost sentient quality. The clients were a polite couple. The wife was friendly. Her husband was an author who kept to himself, working in the attic study. The delays had been longer than usual. The rain, then some family issues on my uncle's end. The wife called one day, her voice polite but strained. She explained that her husband was trying to write his next book, but the unfinished scaffolding outside his study window was a constant distraction. Could we please come and finish the job as soon as possible? My uncle, ever the honest businessman and not wanting a bad referral, made it a priority. "It'll just take a day," he told me. "We'll knock it out, get paid, and everyone will be happy." The rain stops. The ambient sounds become muted, replaced by an eerie, unnatural silence. Part 3. The Eerie Calm. The day we went to finish the job was wrong. It was a warm day for late fall, but the warmth didn't reach your bones. There was a distinct penetrating chill in the air, the kind that seeps through your jacket and settles deep inside you. The sky was a flat, featureless grey, casting the world in a monochrome pallor. There was no wind, no birdsong. The neighbourhood was preternaturally still, as if holding its breath. It was the perfect setting for a scene in a Gothic novel, a stark contrast to the simple physical work we were there to do. We pulled up to the house. The front was already done, a cheerful colour that now seemed mocking against the grey day. We headed to the back, where the tall 3-story scaffolding stood like a skeletal beast against the siding. My uncle, being the expert, would handle the detailed touch-ups. My job was the broad, easy strokes. He looked up at the highest platform, 3 stories off the ground, and then at me. "You aren't scared of heights, are you?" he asked. I was 17. Of course I was a little scared, but admitting that felt like admitting I was still a kid. "Nah," I lied, trying to sound nonchalant. "I'm good." A smile broke across his face. "Great. I need you to take care of the top section, right up by that attic window." The sound of footsteps on metal scaffolding, rhythmic and hollow. The music becomes a slow, tense pulse. Part 4. The Ascent and the Gaze. I started to climb. The metal scaffold tubes were cold under my hands. With each step, the world below the familiar shapes of my uncle's truck, the lawn, the tools, grew smaller and more distant. I had a utility belt laden with brushes, and I hauled up cans of paint that dangled precariously from ropes. My heart was thumping, a mix of the physical exertion and the latent fear of the height. I finally reached the top platform. It was sturdy, but the height was dizzying. The backyard looked like a miniature diorama. I took a moment to steady myself, then got to work. I cracked open a can of paint, The sharp smell, a familiar comfort in the unnerving silence. Dip, stroke, wipe. Dip, stroke, wipe. It was a meditative rhythm. I worked my way laterally until I was directly beside the small oval attic window. It was grimy on the outside, but the glass was clear enough to see into the room. I bent down to dip my brush, and when I stood back up to paint the trim above the window, my eyes drifted inward, and I saw him. The author. He was sitting at a desk, but he wasn't writing. He was just staring directly out the window, at me. His face was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen. It was utterly, completely barren. There were no lines of stress, no furrows of anger, no flicker of curiosity. It was a smooth, placid mask, a void. The eyes were open, but they seemed to look right through me, into some vast, internal emptiness. The music cuts out abruptly. All that remains is the sound of the narrator's quickened breath. Part 5. The unblinking end. The shock of seeing him there, of being watched so intently by that emotionless face, made me jolt. I took an involuntary step back on the platform. I managed a nervous, apologetic chuckle and a weak smile as if to say, "Sorry to disturb you." He didn't react. Not a twitch. Not a blink. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement that was horrifying in its calmness, he raised his hand from beneath the desk. In it was a pistol. He had been holding it the entire time. He never broke eye contact with me. His empty, hollow gaze remained locked on mine as he pressed the barrel of the gun to his own temple. There was no dramatic pause, no final word. There was only the deafening, explosive crack of the gunshot. It was so loud, so violently out of place in the silent afternoon. I gasped, a small strangled sound ripped from my throat. My body reacted before my mind could, lurching backward in a primal recoil from the horror. But I was on a narrow scaffold, 3 stories in the air. My foot met empty space. A single, shocking gunshot sound effect. The sound of a body tumbling through scaffolding, followed by a heavy, dull thud and the crunch of branches. Part 6. The aftermath. The next thing I knew, I was lying in a thorny bush, gasping for air, a searing, white-hot pain shooting up from my ankle. The world was a blur of grey sky and green leaves. I heard my uncle's frantic shouts, his footsteps pounding across the lawn. He had heard the gunshot and looked up just in time to see me fall. That bush, that lucky, painful bush, saved my life. I had a broken ankle, deep scratches, and a case of shock that would linger for years. The physical wounds healed. The cast came off, the scratches faded. But the image of that man's face, that barren, emotionless mask, as he ended his own life while holding my gaze, that was burned into my mind forever. I went to counseling. I talked about the trauma, the guilt, the sheer terror. I learned that his emptiness wasn't about me. It was the void of severe depression, compounded by marital strife, whiskey, and crippling writer's block. He hadn't been looking at me. He was looking through me at a pain so profound he could no longer bear it. His wife moved out shortly after. The house stood empty, a monument to that terrible day. We never finished the job. To this day, decades later, I cannot bring myself to drive down that street. I'm terrified that if I do, if I glance into that backyard, I'll see him there again in that oval window, a cold, emotionless spectre forever frozen in that final world-shattering moment, staring back at me.
Don't want to lose this channel and always be up to date with new videos? Then make sure to subscribe. The story continues, and it's only getting more interesting.